Well, welcome. Today we're looking at Psalm 121, which may very well be one of your favorite Psalms. It is certainly one of my favorites. It is another of the Psalms of Ascent. Ascent meaning these were songs that pilgrims would sing or recite to one another as they went up to Jerusalem. Jerusalem sat on a number of hills. And so these are songs that pilgrims would sing along the way. These are songs to be sung by people who are heading home, by people who are not home yet, who are not where home is, but are on their way there and are longing for home. And so we're immediately faced with a question. What are the hills that the psalmist is looking at in verse 1? There are two options here. One is, as I said, the hills upon which Jerusalem sits. The other option would be that the hills that he sees are where the threat is found from which he needs help. Now, which leaves out a third option, and that would be that the hills of the earth in general have some kind of mystical um, power where God's help is contained, and that's not really true, although that's often how we interpret or use this verse. But I think the most likely case is that the pilgrim is experiencing threats in his life, and when he lifts up his eyes to the hills where Jerusalem is found, he is reminded, verse 2, that his help comes from the Lord, not the city itself, but the city where the Lord is found, Jerusalem. Thus, his help comes from the Lord. And when he looks at the city, he's reminded that this is not some tribal local deity. This is the God who created heaven and earth. Verse 2. This is the creator of all things, the creator of the heavens, the earth, and of everything and every person that threatens this pilgrim and those that he loves. This is a God who is sovereign over all of it. This is a God who bounds it and contains it and is utterly in control of all of it. He is God. He is God. Which reminds me of another famous passage, Hebrews 11, verse 4, which reminds us that authentic faith is two things: that it believes that God exists, and that secondly, that he rewards those who seek him. He rewards those who seek him. And so often in this life, as we are pilgrims that deal with threats all the time and are moving from what is not our home to what is our home, the most fundamental work that we must be about, that we so often forget, is to simply remember that this God exists. The God who is here, the God who is our creator, and the God who is sovereignly in control, so much so that he will not let our feet be moved. Verse 3. That he is not like an old man who sits in his recliner and is taking an afternoon nap when you are faced with threats. No, not at all. He is a God who keeps Israel, who keeps his people, and he will never, ever slumber nor sleep. This is a God who is in control. This is a God who keeps his people, who is like a shade from the heat of life on our right hand. This reminds me of another passage from John chapter 6. John chapter 6, verse 39, where Jesus says, "And this is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me, that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me, but raise it up on the last day." Raise it up on the last day. And when, on that last day, when he raises us up, where will he take us? He will join us to himself, and he will take us to the hills, to his city, and heaven and earth will be one. And we will dwell in his city in the shade of his love forever and ever. Thus, the threats that even lurk by night, the threats that we cannot see in this life, they shall not strike us, nor the sun by day, the heat of life. Yes, We will feel the heat of life. That will happen. But in all of it, the Lord will keep us from all evil. Do you know that this even includes your sin, let alone others' sin? He will keep your life, Christian. This reminds me of another passage, 1 Corinthians 10. I believe it is verses 12 and 13, where Paul says that no temptation or trial, the word there can be translated either temptation or trial, no temptation or trial has overtaken you but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted or trialed beyond your ability. But with the temptation or the trial, he will provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. Thus, my beloved, flee from idolatry, he says in verse 14. The point there being God contains and restrains all evil so that it is not beyond our ability, but with it he provides the way of escape. Thus he keeps us. He keeps us in our going out and in our coming in. From this time forth, from this moment, from the very moment that you are reading this, he is doing this. From this time forth and forevermore. The Lord is your keeper, Christian. Thus, I find it a happy coincidence that today in my Bible reading, in the McShane Bible reading plan, the other Old Testament passage that comes up is Joshua 1, where Joshua is commanded, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go, in your coming out and in your coming in." Now, this is all very inspiring. And it is so reassuring, and yet we ought to ask ourselves, how is it that we can read this passage? How is it we modern, mostly Gentile, if you're reading this, you're probably a Gentile Californian. How can we read this and take assurance in a psalm that speaks of God keeping Israel? How does that work? And if we think about this, we are given even more reassurance, because we keep reading our Bibles from Psalm 121 and we realize that all Israel was boiled down into one Israel, Jesus. And this Jesus died and was raised from the dead, and so that all who trust in him now can be in Israel, can be part of God's people, all who are united to him by faith alone, in him alone. And so if you have faith in Christ, you are now part of God's people, God's Israel, and you can read this psalm as your own. This is God's promise to you, Christian. He who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep, just as he did not on that third day sleep, but instead raised his own Son from his sleep, that we may live forever in his all-encompassing love. To him be the glory.